Okay, so good evening everyone. We're down the shed very briefly because firstly it's cold and secondly I want to do something a bit different in this video. But the reason I come down here is to grab hold of a couple of other locks to give you a spread of the locks I've got. Every one of these locks is manufactured by someone different, but they all have one thing in common, which we're going to go to in this video. So I'm going to leg it back inside now into the warm and hopefully talk you through a bit of history of a place called Willenhall. Okay, so for the geographically struggling out there, this is the United Kingdom, Great Britain and Northern Ireland. So that would be England, Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland. You can also see parts of the rest of the island of Ireland, called Ireland, just to confuse everybody, and a small chunk of northwestern Europe. So if we fly into the centre of England, we come to a place called the West Midlands. It's pretty logical, it's the west side of the middle bit of England. And the main city in this part of the country is Birmingham. It's pretty large, most people would say it's the second city of England. And to the northwest of Birmingham is an area called the Black Country. Now the Black Country is basically Wolverhampton, Walsall, Dudley, West Brom if we want to talk about it that way. And so that's called the Black Country, well known for ironworking in general and lots of other things. Now just to give you a rough idea of my knowledge of this area, although I am a passionate Welshman, although my accent doesn't quite show it, the reason being was I was born and brought up in the West Midlands, but the other side of Birmingham from the Black Country. My wife, however, her family all come from West Bromwich, or at least her dad's side all come from West Bromwich, and so I have some links to this part of the country. Let's dive in a little bit closer to Wolverhampton and Walsall. Okay, so slap bang in the middle of here you see a little place called Willenhall, halfway between Walsall and Wolverhampton. Now, nowadays you can hardly tell where Wolverhampton finishes and Walsall begins, and to be honest, Willenhall, although it's named as a place, you might as well blur it into either one. Same goes for lots of the other little villages that used to exist in the area. You can sort of see here that it's a mix of general housing and quite a bit of sort of light industrial, I suppose you'd call it nowadays. But in the past it was a little bit different. So let's pull up an older map. This is a map from about 1900, and as you can see, left hand side you have Wolverhampton, right hand side you've got Walsall, big green fields in the middle and a small village of Willenhall. Here we have Willenhall itself. Basically it's sandwiched between the railway line that curves in from the top and goes across east to west, west to east, and then at the bottom you also have another railway line that goes east to west, west to east. So it's stuck between the two, but quite a useful place when it comes to trying to get access to the railways. To give the Americans and others a bit of a scale reference here, you can basically fit the whole of Willenhall in 1900 in the grassy bit between the Lincoln Memorial, the Washington Monument and the White House. It's about 1.5 kilometres wide and about 1 kilometre north to south. Why have I just spent 4 minutes explaining why a very small village in the 1900s exists in the middle of England? Well, basically, it's one of the birthplaces of the lock making industry in the world. When you look at it from its size, it really shouldn't be important, but because of history, it is. And we're going to run through hopefully a little bit of interest as to why that's true. Just to show you how important lock making is to Willenhall, what we have here is the coat of arms of the council, local council for Willenhall, and also their flag, which they got quite recently, but I think it looks quite good. The coat of arms is from about 1930s, so it's not that old, but still quite old. The local football club, called Willenhall Town FC, has the nickname of the Lockmen. It's obviously important to the people in this area, and here's the reason why. There are records variable records, but records going back to probably the 1500s that relate to lock making and metalworking in this area. There are very good records from 1660, when there were over 95 locksmiths in Willenhall Hall itself. By the time you got to 1770, there were 148 locksmiths in Willenhall Hall. By the time you got to the mid-1800s, there were 340 locksmiths and lock makers in Willenhall Hall itself. And that ignores the fact that there were another 100 or so in Wolverhampton, just down the road. So, as you can see, it was a big hub of lock making within the 17 and 1800s. And that went on probably well into the mid-1900s, when things started becoming a bit more industrialized. Everything got bigger and everyone got bought up by the big multinationals. Let's have a quick look at where all of these guys are. So I started plotting them, and as you can see, they start to fill the map up pretty quickly. These are just the lock makers that I know of that have names beginning with A, B and C that existed around about 1900, either side of 1900. Yeah, let's say 10, 15 years, possibly a little bit longer than that, either side of 1900. There's quite a few. But what you find is a lot of them are working out of their own house. They're working out of a back room, maybe a shed in the garden. If they're lucky, a garage or a workshop brick built, outside. And it's only really a handful that have big works that they're using to pump out significant numbers of locks. And over time, the smaller guys disappear, they start amalgamating, joining together, they get bought up by the bigger guys, and eventually the bigger guys grow. So just to demonstrate the importance of this area, I thought I'd just rattle through some of the big names that started in this little village, and a couple either side. So let's start with one of the real big boys, Chubb. Chubb started in Wolverhampton and still has a base there as far as I'm aware. Let's jump the other side of Willenhall Hall and go to Walsall, and you basically have the Walsall Locks and Cart Gear Company. They're now known just as Walsall Locks, and they produce the Zenny, the Dragon and the Ace brands. So, back to Willenhall Hall. In moderately alphabetical order, let's jump in with the Anglo-American. The Atlas, Henry Harrison. Henry Harrison produces Belfry, or produced Belfry. Legg & Co, Low and Fletcher. Josiah Parks and Sons, that's the Union brand. The Pinson family, whole range of them, 3 or 4 different companies by the same family. Shaw, which produced locks for the insides of doors, if I remember right, latches. And of course, one of my favourites, Henry Squire and Sons. Also can't forget J. Reynolds, who now are the ERA brand, big company. I'll also mention, just for those Americans who are interested in it, Yale and Town, obviously an American company, started in the USA, but their first entry into the UK came when they bought a company called H&T Vaughan Limited, which at the time was the largest manufacturer in Willenhall, and they bought out the whole factory in 1929 and basically jumped straight into Willenhall as one of the largest manufacturers of locks in the country, and obviously at the time in the world. So back to those locks that I showed you at the beginning, all made by different people, but fundamentally every single one of those locks, at least the older ones, were all manufactured within about a 5-mile radius of each other. I just thought that was an interesting walkthrough of Willenhall, and give some people a bit more history behind some of the locks they've got and the importance of this pretty tiny little village, town just about, in the centre of England. I have to give some serious credit to some online resources that I've used to put all this together, The key one being the history website, which I'll put a link to below. They have a very, very good section on locks and locksmithing in this area. All put together online, but originally by a chap called Jim Evans, who I never met and I never will, unfortunately, as he passed on, but was obviously a font of knowledge. I also want to raise a little bit of awareness of the Lock Museum in Willenhall itself, and I'll put a link down to that below. For those of you who've managed to survive the nearly 11 minutes worth of this video, thank you very much for hanging in with me. Good night, Nostar.